they're going crazy. They're jumping on each other.
One of the most unbelievable finishes you will ever see.
And welcome to it, another edition of Orioles Magic Moments, the podcast. Brett Hollander, along with Geoff Arnold. And Geoff, great to see you as always. We have a very special guest coming up, and he'll join us shortly. He is the grill master, he's the barbecue man, but he's also a former MVP and a multi-time world champion for the Baltimore Orioles, the one and only Boog Powell, one of my all-time favorite Orioles, and he'll be joining us coming up.
I can't wait for this conversation, Brett, because the period of time that we're looking into is maybe the most impressive in team history. And they had everything. They had pitching, they had hitting, they had defense, they had all-stars, they had an incredible manager. These teams had absolutely everything. And I'm really excited to talk to him about, in particular, that 1970s offense, because if you look at some of the numbers in the postseason, they're absolutely staggering. In the 5 games in the World Series, the Orioles had 50 hits, 10 of those were home runs. They had 7 doubles, and then against the Twins in the ALCS, they scored 60 runs in just 8 games. So they were doing absolutely ridiculous things at a time in Orioles history, which everybody remembers so well, and which for me has been incredibly cool to read about and just to follow all the exploits of so many of the different players, because these were teams that had it all.
Yeah, there's no question about it. They win the championship and win the World Series in 66 and 70, but they win 3 consecutive pennants, 69, 70, and 71. The team that lost to the Miracle Mets in 69 won 109 games. The team that won it all in 70 won 108 games. And I think when most people think about the 70 World Series, the Orioles really dominated a young Big Red Machines team. But that series, even though Boog had a great series, we'll talk about it with him coming up, was dominated by number 5, the one and only Brooks Robinson, who may have had, and we'll ask this to Boog coming up, the greatest World Series, arguably in baseball history, when you look at the combined offensive and defensive things to look at. And it's one of those things where I think the country got to see what Brooks did on a daily basis at Memorial Stadium and in the American League. It was on full display in that 70 World Series. And I still, even though I was not alive in 70, have the vision of all the plays going beyond the foul line in third base and making a perfect throw to Boog at first, and Boog picking on a one bouncer. And he did everything, moving to his left, to his right, plus he hits a couple of home runs. So it was one of the more dominant performances in baseball history, to be quite honest with you. So it was a great team. They really handled the Mets. We'll talk about, of course, that Game 5 clincher at Memorial Stadium. And I hate to say it, but can I use the D word? It was really part of a dynasty with those Orioles teams, because even when they won 2 championships then and again, they won in 83, we all know, but they were in contention and really good every year.
They were in that period of time, and I'm going to be really interested to talk to him about Brooks Robinson as well, because like you pointed out, people maybe on a national stage didn't really get to see just how good Robinson was as a third baseman until that point in time. And I'll be interested, too, to talk about with him. With Boog, was it more impressive when you were playing in left field earlier on and Robinson was just cutting off all those ground balls that you figured might get to you? And then you had Aparicio as well playing shortstop. So it's just like not much was getting to you at that point.
No.
Or was it more impressive when you were playing at first base and you suddenly had to get over to the bag because Robinson made another diving pickup on a ball that you probably figured was going to be a base hit? I'll be interested to ask him about that, as well as what it was like with all those great pitching staffs that you had behind you. You had 3 different 20-game winners on the 1970 team. You had 4 different 20-game winners on that 1971 team, one of only 2 pitching staffs in big league history that's produced 4 different 20-game winners. That was a big part of it. I'm a big pitching guy too, so I can certainly appreciate that. But with Boog too, finally getting that elusive MVP during the 1970 season, when he very well could have won it in 1969 as well. Harmon Killebrew ended up winning that award. And just reading back about some of the different pieces of that, those two were joking back and forth where where they were talking at one point, and they later became great friends. So I'll be interested to hear from him about some of those conversations that he and Killebrew might have had about that season, and whether or not, does he still think that it was Killebrew who should have won the MVP that year, while Killebrew thought that it was Boog that should have won that award.
And before we get to Boog Powell, Geoff, I know you've seen it by now. It's been on Twitter. The release of this podcast, which I think is really cool that we're doing it, but also the logo that's been created of both of us, these caricatures of us as magicians, playing on the Orioles magic. I feel good about how I've come across. How do you feel about how you've come across in this cartoon?
I feel fantastic about how I came across for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've got a top hat. You never want to argue with a guy in a top hat. Number two, I got the cane going, so I got a little bit of swag there as well. And the last thing, I have the non-receding hairline. They were very kind in how they treated me in that respect. So it makes me look as good as possible. I guess it's maybe one of those moments where you're like, I guess I made it because someone came up with a caricature of you, but I thought it looked really good. And the depiction of you as well, I thought was also really good.
I feel really good about it. I must say, I feel really good about it. And by the way, you can catch every one of our episodes, Orioles.com/podcast, right, Geoff? That's the best way to get us right now?
Orioles.com/podcast. These drop every Friday. We actually had a double episode that started yesterday, so you can go back and hear our first conversation with Robert Andino, the curse of the Andino and the role that he played against the Boston Red Sox, not only in that game to finish off that season, but also hear from Scotty McGregor about finishing off the 1983 World Series against the Phillies, where he was dominant and where he helped wrap up a world title for the Orioles. Those were two really intriguing conversations. A lot of great stories were told, and I'm really excited based on how it started off, just what is ahead for us in this podcast. And make sure you tune in every Fridays is when it's going to drop, as well as every Mondays. So it's a great way to end the week, and it's a great way to start the week as well by listening to O's Magic.
As we try and entertain and start thinking about baseball in any way we can. And we had a couple of already great conversations. You mentioned them, Geoff. And now it's time for another great conversation with the one and only Boog Powell. Let's get right to it and bring on a Baltimore baseball legend. He's an Orioles Hall of Famer, and he was MVP of the American League in 1970 and a multi-time world champion for the Baltimore Orioles. The grill master himself, the one and only Boog Powell. Boog, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm stuck down here in Key West, and I've been trying to stay home a lot. And thank goodness my son's been here going to the grocery store for me and stuff. But I'm doing pretty good for an older gentleman.
Well, it's great to see you, and you look well. I saw you in spring training just a few weeks ago. Feels like an eternity ago. But let's talk about the 1970 World Series champion Baltimore Orioles, and kind of set the stage for us. You guys are so good. I mean, you win the World Series in '66. You're knocking on the door a few years. Of course, they go from Bauer to Earl. And then '69, 109 wins, the upset loss to the Mets, and then right back at it in '70, and you guys see it through.
Yeah, we were kind of disappointed after the '69 season. I thought that maybe that was our best team. It was probably my best year for just pure stats and everything else. But in the end, I mean, we only had 3 20-game winners that year. So, that couldn't have been too good. We were a really good team. And of course, I think when it came time to come to spring training in 1970, there wasn't a word said, but all of us kind of looked at each other, and we just sort of said, we're not going to let this happen again. And we were all on the same page as far as getting into the World Series and doing this thing again.
When you got through May, I think you were around like 27 and 19, but then once you got to June, you guys just took off. What was kind of the kicker that allowed you to separate from everybody else in the pack? Because you guys ended up winning the division by pretty much a landslide.
Yeah, we just started clicking. I mean, I don't know, maybe I wasn't going that good to start with, and maybe maybe Frank wasn't going that good, and Brooksy, we were all, just sort of dawdling around. And there was no reason that I can remember that we just sort of picked up, and I don't know, we always knew where each of us was in the game time situation. And we just sort of put it together. And then, of course, the pitching came together. And, of course, we always had the defense. And if we got any kind of pitching and a little bit of offense, you weren't going to stop us. We were good.
We obviously have to talk about, specific to that 70 series, about this guy, number 5, Brooksy, and the series he had. I know everyone's talked about it all these decades later, but can you look back and say, was it amazing, or was that just Brooks? I mean, obviously he put together one of the great World Series in baseball history, offensively and defensively. But I think there was a sense from some Orioles players who said, we see this every night.
Yeah, it was like, I've always maintained that if Brooks would have played in New York, he could have been running for president. He was that good. He was just, and it was an honor. It was a privilege to walk out on the same field with him every day. And I felt it every single day when I walked out there with him. And to watch him catch those balls, and but on the other hand, he got him over to first on one hop. So if I don't catch him, it's E5, and there were two pretty good plays. There were 2 pretty good plays over there at third, and he bounced them both over at first, and I came up with them, but I was lucky. So.
Was it more impressive for you when you were playing in left field and he was just taking away so many balls that would have been hits? Because I'm sure for you, it's like not a lot of balls were, a lot of the ground balls were getting to you in left field. Or was it maybe more impressive when you're over at first base and it seems like a ball maybe he's going to get through, and then he makes a diving pickup, and they're like, all right, I better get over and so we can get this out at first.
Yeah, right. When I was playing left, I bet I broke on 100 balls that never got through the infield. I mean, they just sat between him and Louis Aparicio. I mean, they were, 2 Hall of Famers right there playing right in front of me, and nothing ever seemed to get through there. And I break on balls, and I led the league in assists one year, or almost led the league in assists. And just because I gave the ball to either Louis or Brooks, and they took care of it from there, and I got an assist on it. But when I went over to first, it was kind of different being over there. I mean, it was I guess you felt like you were more into the game over at first, and you were closer to him, and I could watch him in action even better than I could in left field. So yeah, I think it was more fun. It was better to watch him at first base than it was in left field.
By the way, the Reds team you guys beat in 5 and really handle in 70, that's a young version of the Big Red Machines. I mean, that is Bench, that's Perez, that's Rose, and I mean, that team is loaded with Hall of Famers.
Yes, they were. Yeah, they were, and we respected them very much. And they just didn't quite have the pitching, that we had. Or maybe we might have been better than them defensively also. And of course, Brooksy had a great series with not only with the glove, but with the bat too. I think he drove in like 5 or 6 runs. I think he hit a couple home runs. Yeah. And, I had a pretty good series, and I don't know, we all just seemed like we all just chipped in just a little bit. And I think for me, the turning point in the series was probably in the first game when we got behind in the first inning. McNally, I think he got behind, and I was hitting maybe in the second inning, and I hit a home run to the opposite field. And I just said, okay, boys, here we go. And that was it. And we started rolling from there.
I mean, you go to the final game, and Mike Cuellar, who ended up going the distance in that one, he had a challenging first inning, but like you said, just because how it kind of started for you guys in that series, what was kind of the vibe when you're coming back into the dugout for the for that first inning, getting your first at bats in a small hole. Was it no fear at all?
I think that maybe there was a little bit of I don't know. Eddie Watt had given up a home run to Lee May the day before, and we lost that fourth game. And all of a sudden, we're getting behind in the fifth game. I said, maybe we better kick it in gear here, boys. And I wasn't worried about Mike Cuellar because Mike Cuellar did that a lot. He would have a rough start, and he'd give up a couple of innings in the first, or a couple of runs in the first inning. And then after that, you weren't going to get him. It was over. If you didn't get him in the first and you didn't knock him out of the game, it was over because he was going to take you all the way.
Boog, everyone will always talk about you and Frank and Brooks as they talk about the legends of Orioles baseball. Also, you have to throw in the Paul Blairs of the world. But tell us about the Mark Berlangers, the Davey Johnsons, the Elrod Hendricks, who made up a huge part of those teams.
Yeah. Oh, man, when you just I used to go out every day, and instead of taking balls at first base, taking ground balls at first base, I would go out to shortstop and take balls with Mark Belanger. And we would have a lot of fun kidding around and said, hey, Blade, I could play short. He said, yeah, maybe you could, but not today. So, and we just fool around a lot. To hang around with guys that had great hands like that and great attitude, and then you watch, you watch Ellie. Ellie, a lot of people didn't, he had a great big bat. He swung a 40-ounce bat, and he didn't look like he was a player, but all of a sudden he would take you deep and he would throw you out. He could catch and he could take you deep. And all of our guys, Merv Retman, there's another example of a guy that, Merv hit a big home run in that World Series also. So, it was a well-balanced team, and whether Earl had anything to do with it or didn't, I don't know. We always had the kind of nucleus there, and he just kind of filled in the parts of it. And it was a lot of fun going to the ballpark every day. We had a great time out there.
What was it like for you getting to play for Earl?
Well, I played with Earl in the minor leagues. We were in Appleton, Wisconsin, and he was a player manager in 1960. And we were in Cedar Rapids or Sioux City or someplace, and some big first baseman hit a line drive at Earl, and Earl jumped up and hit him right in the chest, hit him right in the sternum, right there, knocked him out cold. So me and a guy named Fody Anthony, he was our shortstop, went over there and we got our hats and we're waving our hats and said, "Get up, Earl, get up. Come on, you got to manage." He says, I quit. And that's when Earl quit playing and he started managing full time. And I didn't see him again for 8 years, because I was in the big leagues. I came up in 61, and then he came up, I guess it was in 68. He was a coach. I don't know if he was a first base coach or a bench coach or what he was, but then we weren't going so good in 68, and Hank, they let Hank Bauer go at the All-Star break and gave Earl the job. And first thing Earl did when he got me was give me the green light to run it on first. He said, "If you feel like stealing, go ahead." So I did. I stole 8 bases that year. So I was pretty happy about that.
We all know how much Earl cherished outs. I'm looking at the stats right now from the 1970 club, and we talk about all these different numbers now that are valued. That Orioles team walked a lot. You walked that season 104 times. Don Buford walked 109. Everyone in the starting lineup walked 50, 60 times. You guys knew how to get on base besides just hitting the long ball.
Oh yeah, and one of my favorite stats, and I didn't know this until I came home. I think it was that winter, or maybe it was the next winter. Somebody brought it up that I had 18 intentional walks that year.
Wow.
On that club. how in the heck can I have 18 walks? I must have been pretty good or something, you know? So anyway, yeah, I'd take a walk in a minute. I didn't mind walking. I really didn't. And because, I mean, I was in a situation on our lineup where, you know, they didn't want to walk me to get, I don't know who's sitting behind me. I don't even remember. But when they, you know, you had Frank and Brooks usually right in front of me. Or Frank would hit third and I'd hit fourth and Brooks would hit fifth, or whatever it was. I know I hit fifth a lot in that lineup, but it was third, fourth, and fifth, and it was, you know, who do you pitch to? I mean, that was a real tough question right there.
In 68, you were an all-star, but in 69 and 70, you know, you talk about how much you walked, the intentional walks, but you hit for a really high average, lots of power, lots of RBIs. How did you take that extra step forward in the 69 and 70 seasons, which you know, you could have been the MVP in both of those years?
Yeah, you know, like we were talking, I think I did have probably a little better year in 69, but Kilbrew won it in 69, and he put together some pretty good stats too. I mean, he had I think he had 42 or 43 home runs and drove in 130 or something like that. But I hit over 300 that year. That was the only year that I hit over 300 in the big leagues, and my stats weren't too far from his. But Killer came up to me in spring training the next year, and he says, "You deserve that." And I just took that and I said, "No," I said, "the right guy got it." And he was the right guy. He was a great guy and a good man.
Boog, I know how much you cannot wait to serve the fans at Camden Yards with your great barbecue again. Hopefully that's happening at some point here soon. But in quarantine, laying low right now as we all are, can Boog Powell get it going on the grill with your typical menu, from the ribs to the Boston butt to the pulled pork and everything else?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, you saw us in spring training. Were we in rare form or not?
Yeah.
I mean, we were turning out some of the best barbecue I think we've ever turned out was in spring training this year. And my son had a lot to do with that, but because he is the master of that. And of course, in Camden Yards, it's a little bit different, but it's still really good. And I you know what I miss most? I miss doing that, and I miss the smells, and I miss fans, and I miss hanging around the people. I miss talking to people when they come into the ballpark and say, you know, "Hi, how are you today? Nice to see you," and those kind of things, and talking to people about the Orioles and how things are going. And I'm kind of like an official greeter out on Utah Street, which I really like to do that. And I miss that, I think, more than the actual, you know, the barbecue and all of that. That's good. We can do all of that. But I miss that more than anything.
You are such an ambassador for everything at the ballpark, but you're right. The smell right now, just to see the smoke rise up from Utah Street and a cold one and some pulled pork sound pretty good right now.
Oh man, I'm telling you. Well, JW and I, my son JW, and we have 2 slabs of ribs, and I'm going to put them on the grill this evening, and we're going to make some coleslaw and some black beans and rice for dinner tonight. So sometimes it's good to be me.
I was going to ask you real quick, Boog, because and I think I mentioned this to JW when I saw him down at spring training this year. My favorite part of Camden Yards, and I love to eat, is Boog's barbecue. I love coming out there. So I want to get your take on what is the ultimate barbecue meal for you.
Oh wow. I'm very partial to brisket, and we did in spring training. There's a place in Sarasota called Restaurant Depot, and we went over to Restaurant Depot and we got an Angus brisket, prime cut. And I smoked it for about 3 hours. Then we wrapped it up and cooked it again for about another 3 hours, wrapped up. And then, of course, we save all the juice that accumulates in that. And this brisket was like, it was fork tender, and it weighed 15 pounds, and it was just fork tender. And it was probably as good a thing as I've ever cooked. And I enjoyed that a lot. But I mean, you know, where do you draw the line? I mean, we've cooked thousands of Boston butts and thousands of slabs of ribs and a whole lot of briskets. Not quite as many briskets, but that's, to me, that's where it's at right there.
It all sounds so good right now. Boog, we can't thank you enough. That was a whole lot of fun reminiscing about that 1970 world champion Baltimore Orioles team, a team where that season you won the American League MVP and handled the young Big Red Machines in that 70 World Series, Boog. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I hope you and your family are well.
Thank you. Same to you, and hope you guys get through all of this stuff and have no problems. I hope we get to see you before the year's up.
That's the hope. Thanks, Boog. Well, one of my favorite people, one of the best players in Orioles history, John Boog Powell. Always a pleasure. And Geoff, I want to put this in perspective a little bit. It's a 5-game World Series win for the Orioles in 1970. They win Game 5, October 15, 1970, at Memorial Stadium, 9-3 over Cincinnati. In that game, you mentioned it, Mike Cuellar goes the distance, 9 innings, 3 earned runs, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts. But you look at this Reds team. This Reds team was no pushover. It wasn't like the Mets setup a year before. They won 102 games. The Orioles won 108. But these were two powerhouses meeting in the Fall Classic.
I think maybe the difference, and Boog talked about this, was the pitching that separated them. I mean, you had 3 20-game winners on your pitching staff. And for Cuellar, and Boog pointed this out as well, if you didn't get to him in the first inning, you probably weren't going to get to him after that. And Game 7 was proof of that. Reds able to get a couple of runs. Orioles, though, were able to respond right after that, so that made a big difference too. But Cuellar went on to retire 24 out of the last 27 guys that he faced, and goes to show just how once he was able to turn the page and once the offense got started, and as Boog said, we had to put it in high gear, and we needed to turn things up a little bit. Once they got going, and once Cuellar got his rhythm, he was dominant. But if you go back and look at that first inning and maybe some of the things that Earl Weaver said after the game, Cuellar was maybe one batter where one more piece of hard contact away from possibly being pulled in the first inning, and how that could have possibly changed everything. But he got things on track. The offense did what it was supposed to do, and the Orioles came away as world champions.
Yeah, the Orioles really pounded Reds pitching in Game 5, the clincher. Just to kind of roll through it, Paul Blair, who of course started in center field, 3 hits. Frank batted third, 2 hits. Boog batted cleanup, 2 hits. Merv Retman, 2 hits. Brooks had a hit. Davey Johnson had 3. Andy Etchebarren was the starting catcher for that. So it was a lot of up and down the lineup sort of attack. Everyone who started except for Cuellar got a hit in the game. And it was dominant in front of over 45,000 on 33rd Street in Baltimore. So, just again, I think it's important to note this. Pete Rose, Tony Perez, Johnny Bench, Lee May, Hal McRae. It was a Dave Concepcion. I mean, this Reds team was loaded.
The beginning of the Great Red Machine. It was the preview of what they had. And don't forget, too, they were managed by Sparky Anderson, who goes down as one of the greatest managers in Major League history. But what lacked for them was the pitching. And the Orioles, they pitch better than anybody. Their defense was better than anybody in baseball, and that was shown being on national TV, just how good Brooks Robinson was in that series, making ridiculous plays that maybe folks weren't seeing. And the way that they went about that process, and the fact that they had those 2 pieces, and then that they later on would go and have 4 different 20-game winners, the pitching and the defense, as good as the offense was, those, I think, to me, were the 2 X factors that made that dynasty Orioles.
Boog, the regular season MVP. Brooks, the World Series MVP. And again, if you don't believe me, go to YouTube, go to baseballreference.com. Brooks Robinson dominated that World Series about as much as anyone could possibly do it, both offensively and defensively. Although a lot of those defensive plays won't show up in a box score. They are available on YouTube, I'm told. But Geoff, that was a lot of fun. And just thinking about Boog's barbecue right now, it just warms you up inside.
Maybe one of the best things to happen to me, it was early on in spring training, and I'm walking into the elevator, and I'm standing next to somebody who I'm like, because I was thinking for a second, I was like, is that? I was like, that's not Boog. I was like, but that might be Boog's son. And sure enough, it was JW. And he said to me, if you ever want like any barbecue, just have somebody come down, just say that it's for you, and we'll get you all hooked up. And so that was my first big league broadcast. So I wasn't feeling too hungry that day. I was trying to, channel all my energy and just like, do a good job and everything. But I will say later on in spring training, maybe like a week or two later, I was at a game and I had a friend in town, and I said, well, I'm not calling the game today, so obviously we're going to Boog's. And we went out into left field, and JW took great care of us. I have so many things from Boog's barbecue that I liked, that I like, and so it makes it very difficult when I go out there to figure out what to order, because obviously you don't want to get into a food coma or anything like that, especially when you're broadcasting. But so many great things about Boog's barbecue, and as I said in the podcast, Boog's is probably my favorite thing about Camden Yards.
It's one of mine as well. I mentioned the pulled pork, but I really like the turkey. Throw some slaw on there and throw some horseradish on there and a little barbecue sauce. And they have the great kettle chips. And that just sounds amazing right now. But we'll leave it there, Geoff. That was a great time going back down memory lane with Boog Powell and more Orioles magic moments here on the podcast. So until next time, see ya.